Greetings, everyone. My name is Ted Alter, Professor of Agricultural Economics and Regional Economics at Penn State University. We're pleased to be with you today. We're going to discuss the concept of intentional innovation communities. Michael?
My name is Michael Fortunato. I'm a research associate here at Penn State University in the Center for Economic and Community Development. And you're probably already asking yourself, what is an intentional innovation community? Well, we're here to tell you a little bit more about that. Think for a few moments about innovation. What does innovation mean to you? Does innovation mean great technological progress, new technologies, computer software, biotech, all sorts of great inventions? Or does innovation actually have multiple meanings? Think for a second what innovation means to you. Now let's compare that to the context in Australia. Certainly a lot of cities have, in Australia, many of the capital cities, places like Sydney and Melbourne, have enjoyed great strides in innovation, in innovative technological development, and taking advantage of their relationships and networks across the community and with major research institutions. Now let's think about rural areas in Australia. How are they a little bit different? Well, of course, what might be innovative in one place, in the cities, might be different for lagging in rural communities that don't have the same access to research institutions, may not have the same kinds of developed networks of entrepreneurs, and may not have an entrepreneurial ecosystem for developing new innovations. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it means that there's a disconnect between cities and many rural areas and also many declining and lagging communities. That's where an IIC comes in. Intentional innovation communities are different from traditional innovation development that focuses on innovation within firms. Instead, intentional innovation communities take a look at innovation networks across firms and across agencies and organizations in order to build productive networks and to build a collaborative space for sharing ideas about innovation and developing new and synergistic ways of getting that innovation to take place. So what makes an IIC different from other innovation initiatives? Well, first of all, we're working across communities and not just within firms. So we're trying to work across firms and build collaborative bonds so that places can begin to compete not just as individual firms or a group of firms, but more as a region with a strategy and a focus that really ties into the strengths of that region. We focus on building democracy and a democratic process so that communities aren't constantly dependent on sources of funding or on government programs, but rather can develop support networks within themselves in order to create a sustainable ecosystem for innovation work. We also focus on relationships and process, not necessarily products and outcomes. So rather than try to think we're going to develop a specific technology, we try to develop a meta process for developing technologies within communities that's ongoing. Also, we focus on the co-creation of knowledge, not necessarily expert citizen transfer. We don't tell people how to innovate. We want them to discover how innovation makes sense to them. It's a lot more sustainable and much easier to carry forward if the people who are going to carry on the initiative help to develop the initiative as well. And most importantly, it's inexpensive. We look at this as a cost-effective way of stimulating innovative behavior in a time when funding is very, very scarce, but the needs have never been greater.
Grounded in what Michael is saying is the idea that community development is antecedent to economic development and other kinds of development. What does community development mean? Well, community development fundamentally is about building the relationships, building the bridges, if you will, across various groups, interests, people, firms, organizations within the community. It's about bringing together people and organizations that come from differing perspectives. Why is this important in the context of intentional innovation communities? It's important because the notion of innovation, the source of innovation, is very often, typically, at the intersection of different cultures, of new and different ideas, of the different people, different organizations coming together and exploring their perspectives in an open and a transparent way that fosters creativity and fosters new thinking and fosters new ideas. Let me give you an example. There's a story in a really wonderful book that I'd recommend to you. It's called The Medici Effect. The author is Franz Johansson. And one of the stories that Johansson shares in that book has to do with finding connections between architecture and processes of nature. As the story goes, there was an architect working in Zimbabwe who had the charge of building a new hotel in the capital of Zimbabwe. But he had to do it cheaply, efficiently, and no air conditioning. Quite a challenge in that environment. Well, he found inspiration observing and watching the work of termites and the building of termite mounds. For those termite mounds, and you can picture these termite mounds on the plains of Zimbabwe, to be efficient and to support the termite populations, these mounds need to maintain a constant temperature, roughly around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, within the mound, while the outside temperatures vary from below 0 Fahrenheit at night to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. How do they do that? Well, they construct the mounds in such a way that air flows from the bottom of the mound up through the mound, and they regulate the airflow and the temperature by opening and closing using cool wet mud the entry points for the air. And this process allows, this approach allows that temperature, that core temperature, to be maintained at the appropriate level to foster the termite populations and their activity. Well, what's the inspiration here? The inspiration and the innovation is, let's build a hotel that way. And that's exactly what this architect did. He regulated the airflow in such a way that it came from the bottom of the hotel, flowed up through the hotel. There was no of the usual air conditioning equipment that was necessary. He did it at low cost, and it was a sustainable approach in that environment. The point here is that the intersection came between an architectural need to build this hotel and a process of nature, the termites building their termite mound and regulating the temperature. It was at that intersection that the inspiration came for building the approach to the architectural design and the construction of that hotel. There's where the innovation was. So what happens with community development? You bring together people from different perspectives, different points of view. You have them engage in conversation. They find commonality. They seek commonality at the intersection of their interests and their perspectives, and often stemming from that is innovation. So we do argue that it's community development that's the antecedent to innovation and economic or broader development within the community. We've had the opportunity to work with in developing these ideas about intentional innovation communities, to work with a colleague from Australia, Dr. David Evans. David Evans, many of you, or some of you may have heard of David or know David personally. David is an entrepreneur and an innovator in Australia, a leader in these domains. David's inspiration and early work came from time not only that he has spent in Australia in his projects, but his time early in his career and furthering his education, gaining additional experience in the U.S. At Stanford University and working, observing activities in the Silicon Valley of the United States, and watching the behavior of competing firms as they both worked together and competed with one another, and it's at the intersections that the innovations emerged. David saw this, David observed this, and he has been instrumental in developing this idea of intentional innovation communities. And Michael and I have had the great pleasure and the opportunity to connect with David and work with David over the past several years. Now, we've actually done IIC work in Australia. We've done it in the Northern Inlands region of New South Wales. We've participated in a project funded by the New South Wales Department of Trade and Investment. The work we did in conjunction with our colleague Philip Thomas, who is with you today, was done last summer and last fall. We actually worked in the communities of Armidale and Tamworth, Bingra, Moree, and Narrabri. And I think our experience there leads us to believe that there is great potential for this IIC concept in other regions, other communities and other regions across rural Australia. The question, or one question, is how can this experience with IICs in a community setting sort of be translated and transferred and used in other organizational contexts, not just in a community context. Michael will tell you a bit about the process of our IIC work in rural Australia. Michael, I'll turn to you.
So as you can see, IICs are actually an alternative approach to traditional innovation development. They may produce physical technologies, they may produce other types of innovations as well. In fact, the IICs themselves are an innovation. It's a new way of understanding how socially people can connect within communities to get something started when not much has been happening in the field of innovation, or at least in places where communities haven't had the opportunity to discuss collectively what innovation means and how they can get it done. Well, that sounds great, but I bet you're thinking, does it work? And how can we actually show that this is a viable strategy? Well, we have some examples for you, and actually we drew some examples from our community development work in the United States. One example was in Rockland, Maine. If you know anything about Maine, or if you've been up to Maine, it's in the northeasternmost corner of the United States. It's a very rocky and remote place with a lot of coastline and a lot of lobsters too. The town of Rockland used to be a dirty, smelly, dangerous cannery town. And within 10 years, it went from having that kind of a distinction to all of a sudden being one of the premier destinations on the East Coast for travel, for luxury, for a number of other seaside amenities. How did it do that in 10 years? Well, what happened is that the local small business population started an organization to bring all small businesses together and say, we can't be competitors anymore. We need to work together as a team to make a great Main Street and a great destination. By sharing their ideas and working together as a team, they were able to develop a coordinated system of downtown activities that would raise interest in the entire area and the entire region. Eventually, even networking with other communities as well, like nearby Camden, and having programs with their Chamber of Commerce. They brought in local institutions, they brought in other agencies across the area, including economic development agencies, and they succeeded. Why? Partially because they collaborated and created a forum for discussing innovation and actually bringing it to action. Another example is right here at State College. The New Leaf Initiative is a not-for-profit group that's designed almost to be a green incubator, except it's more than that. It's a real forum for sharing ideas on sustainability and bringing them to action. It's a place where people who are interested in actually developing ideas and moving them forward can come so that they don't really feel like they're all alone in this. In fact, this is commonly a place where people find partners for their businesses. It's been extremely successful in the area, and it's a growing enterprise, and we're certainly happy to have it here. But what could we do in Australia as well? Well, we thought, maybe we could capture the spirit of collective innovation and develop some IICs as prototypes and see what happens. And also to monitor the process so that we can try to make it stronger if we ever try to do IICs again. What we found was really interesting. What we did is we went into each of these places and we held 2 workshops that represented 2 phases of IIC work. The first workshop was simply getting to know one another and discussing innovation for the first time. Now, the only way this really works is if these folks, maybe they know each other socially, but they haven't had the opportunity to actually discuss innovation as a group with a purpose behind it. And it was previously there was really no forum for doing this in these kinds of areas. And we found immediately that there were a lot of contested definitions of what innovation meant and what entrepreneurship meant and what the local issues and the local problems were. The first stage was creating an identity, understanding the region, understanding the area, and understanding what innovation meant given the strengths, capacities, and weaknesses and opportunities for development that each area presented. The second workshop, or the second phase, was a motion towards action. We took all of the ideas that we had generated over the first phase and tried to push them forward to plans, breaking into work groups, talking to one another, and saying, given the people that are right here in this room, how can we make a difference, giving our strengths and talents? So we created plans for action around some of the most popular ideas, discussed what roles everyone could play in developing these ideas, and moved people towards the important step of forming a formal charter around this group that could monitor and maintain the innovation activities so that individuals could feel safe to join the group, that it would have continuity beyond the group, and that people would feel comfortable sharing IP with one another, which was an extremely important issue. And the outcomes were very interesting. Almost immediately, we had a lot of enthusiasm from within the group. This enthusiasm spread to a regional level as people knew we were conducting multiple IICs. They immediately wanted to get together with other IIC members to share ideas. The effect was somewhat contagious. Individuals who were particularly active in the IICs really wanted to move it forward. In Armidale, there was even a motion to create a new online system for collaborative innovation work that was customized to the region. This is currently in process right now, and there's also some continuing discussions and some new projects emerging as these IICs continue. What we try to do is hand over ownership of the IIC to the community almost immediately. So these communities are currently taking the leadership in creating their own innovation destiny and moving their own projects forward. So what's next for IICs? Given the early enthusiasm behind IICs, our next plan is to continue to roll these out across regions, both in Australia and elsewhere, and to continue to encourage IICs to network interregionally to share information and to develop new ideas. Another next step would be to create intra and intergovernmental IICs to stimulate government innovation. Well, this is particularly important where you're sitting right now. IICs are helpful not only within communities, but also within complex organizations where information is sometimes siloed or isolated, or where groups haven't had the opportunity to work together on issues that might be mutually beneficial. Ted mentioned earlier the importance of finding intersections between work. IICs help to facilitate that without an excessive input of funding, of manpower, but also it's a quick turnover from the facilitator to the community, who are the real leaders here and the real innovators behind this work. And another next step would be to create specialty IICs for institutions, for entrepreneurs, technology, agriculture. The list goes on and on. There are all sorts of specialized IICs that can address specific community development and regional development issues across Australia and the world.
So Michael mentioned the idea of specialty IICs. Now, I'd like to focus on that for just a minute. Up to this point, we've been talking about community-level IICs, if you will, and where we're talking about like working in Armidale or Moree or Bingra or Narrabri or Tamworth. We're talking about IIC in that context. However, it's also really useful to think about these specialty IICs because often what has been suggested to us and what we see is that thinking of a community within the context of, let's say, the entrepreneurs in a particular rural area or rural region, or within the context of folks that are working in agriculture, in the agricultural industry, in agribusiness. There's a certain focus and commonality there that those folks can bring, intersections that they can bring and find and create innovations that are particularly important to their sector of the economy and of society that can be particularly important. Sometimes it's the case that having the homogeneity, if you will, within the context of those particular specialty areas, it's a little easier perhaps for people to come together, develop a shared vision, to share ideas, and to find those intersections that result in new innovative thinking. that contributes to the economic and the social welfare of their businesses and the sector of the economy. Anyhow, the notion of specialty IICs, I think, deserves particular attention from us in our work going forward. So, Michael, let's give it a try. Maybe we can do a little IIC work right here.
Right here?
Right here.
I bet we can do that right here. You know
think
why?
so.
Just to recap IICs, I think that's there's no reason we couldn't do an IIC right here. After all, IICs are citizen driven. We have citizens right here. They're catalytic. We've got a group of catalytic individuals sitting in front of us right now. They're focused on building innovative leadership capacity. We have innovative leaders here. They're focused on building knowledge networks. Who wouldn't like to know more people and share ideas? And of course, it relies on the power of people and people's ideas, not just technology, although it can use technology effectively.
Yeah, let me comment on that just a minute. The idea that everyone has something really interesting and valuable to contribute to the conversation, and that if we can bring that out and put it up against the valuable thoughts and ideas and perspectives and experiences of others, then we have that intersection.
Absolutely.
Then we have that possibility of an innovation emerging that we might not have seen had we not talked to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Absolutely. And I think we can actually make this happen right now. We can see where those intersections lie right in this room. Oh, that's very exciting. All
That's
right.
fantastic. Yep.
Let's give it a try. So,
Michael, what do you think are some of the key questions that the folks, our colleagues, our friends in Canberra might talk about, might consider going forward here?
oh, there's so many of them. I think the first one, the most important one, is first of all, what does innovation mean? I mean, after all, we're talking about an intentional innovation community. We're a community right here in this room. We're also innovating, but what does innovating mean? What does it mean to you? I think that's one of the first and most important questions to consider.
I think that's exactly right, and I think there's a follow up to that, a really important follow up to that question, and that is what do you think are the key issues facing Australian innovation, facing citizens and businesses and government in Australia? What are the key questions of innovation that need to be addressed in those contexts?
Oh, yeah, and that's likely to be a good one because innovation isn't likely to be the same everywhere. Certainly, as you travel across Australia, you're going to find different paradigms of innovation just about everywhere you go because the places are so unique.
Absolutely. Let us leave you with one last question, and that is, how might you use IIC concepts and ideas in your own work? Philip, take it away.